Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, distinguished participants, thank you all for being with us for a dialogue on a topic of great importance for my country and not only, namely the promotion of the use of the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. It is a great honor for me to be the host of today's event. As a professor of international law and member of the International Law Commission, a career diplomat, former pleading agent before the International Court of Justice, and as current Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania, it's natural for me to attach great importance to the peaceful settlement of disputes, both from a theoretical and from the practical perspectives. So the respect for this fundamental principle lies at the very heart of Romania's foreign policy, together with the respect for international law and the promotion of the international rule of law. This should be an integral part of the foreign policy of each and every state in the world. And one concrete way through which we can accomplish this is strengthening the ICJ in this, and this is the main objective of the events I'm hosting today. Looking into the lessons drawn from the post-Second World War history, Romania believes that the role of the international courts and tribunals should be further acknowledged and strengthened in order to consolidate the rules-based international order and international rule of law. Moreover, in our globalized and technologically advanced society, the settlement of disputes through peaceful means, including by using international justice, is required more than ever, the cost of doing otherwise being too dangerously high. During my last visit at The Hague on November 9th, 2020, I have exchanged views with the President of the ICJ and the Registrar of the International Court of Justice, Mr. Gauthier, regarding the potential means through which us as states could contribute to increasing the essential role that the court has for the international community. And it was in this context that I have advanced the idea of launching a campaign of intensifying the outreach demarches by states supportive of the ICJ in favor of an enhanced use of the World Court. The ICJ high officials welcomed this proposal, which is part of the strong support of Romania to the ICJ. Against this background, we have organized today's event. Although the ICJ is both a contentious and an advisory jurisdiction, the objective of our today's discussion is to examine how the role and contribution of the ICJ in maintaining international peace can be reinforced. In other words, how the access to the court's contentious jurisdiction could be widened. The increasing number of cases on the docket, including ones of utmost complexity, as well as the reference to the jurisdiction of the ICJ in numerous conventions, are indicative of the state's confidence in its high-quality judicial work. Many cases involve issues of interest not only for the parties directly concerned, but also for the international community as a whole. Thus, the influence of the court in international relations is felt more and more broadly, whilst its judgments are perceived as unbiased, fully built upon international law and contributing to its development. However, the ICJ's jurisdiction is rooted in state consent. Consequently, states must agree to bring their disputes before the court, either in advance of a particular dispute or when a dispute has arisen. And as we all know, consent can be given in four ways: by special agreement, by compromissory clause, by depositing unilateral declarations recognizing as compulsory the jurisdiction of the ICJ, and by forum prorogatum. In a nutshell, the only real limit for states to submit cases to the court is their willingness to do so. The jurisdiction of the court, based on the optional clause, as envisaged in Article 36 of the statute, implies that each state which has recognized ipso facto and without special agreement the compulsory jurisdiction of the court has the right to bring any other state which has accepted the same obligation before the court by filing an application instituting proceedings with the court. Conversely, it undertakes to appear before the court should proceedings be instituted against it by any other such state. Therefore, in this instance, the jurisdiction of the court is based on the convergence of the wills of states expressed independently of each other through unilateral acts, namely the declarations recognizing as compulsory the jurisdiction of the court. So the necessary condition is, of course, that the respective dispute should not have been excluded by one or the other of the parties from the jurisdiction of the court. The possible reservations that states may formulate when depositing such declarations establish exceptions or qualifications to the commitments made in the declarations to recognize the jurisdiction, thus protecting the declaring state against undesired judicial involvement to the extent specified. Needless to say that this goes both ways, as the reservation made on conditions of reciprocity will weaken to the same extent the opportunity of the declaring state to bring a case to the court against another state. It was believed that if states were progressively to adhere to the optional clause, the court would also gradually achieve universal compulsory jurisdiction. Up to now, 74 states have deposited unilateral declarations recognizing the court's compulsory jurisdiction, and cases have been submitted based on such declarations. But we cannot afford to stop at the threshold of 2/3 of United Nations member states. Distinguished participants, as I mentioned before, while acceptance of the court's contentious jurisdiction can be achieved in various modalities, I would like to underscore the importance of building a stronger commitment of states to widely access the ICJ jurisdiction for finding solutions based on law for any disputes arising between them. And this can only be attained not only by promoting the compulsory jurisdiction of the court, by means of its recognition ipso facto in relation to any other state accepting the same obligation, but also by inclusion of compromissory clauses in treaties establishing the ICJ as the dispute settlement forum. Securing in this manner the resort to the ICJ as a permanent option on the table would reinforce the court's leverage to help maintain or even restore peace and reassure states that the settlement to any legal dispute is within reach in accordance with international law. Ladies and gentlemen, as a state which has seized the court in the past with a maritime delimitation case for which I had the honor to serve as agent, and which has subsequently accepted the compulsory jurisdiction of the court, Romania is highly appreciative of the effectiveness and fairness of the court, and thus well placed to plead for the widest recognition of its jurisdiction. Romania's engagement with the World Court started with the acceptance of the compulsory jurisdiction of the Permanent Court of International Justice, on whose bench also served the Romanian judge, Professor Negulescu. The communist period registered a downturn, given that Romania followed the same approach as other socialist countries, which did not trust the ICJ sufficiently to accept its jurisdiction as compulsory. In addition, all ex-communist states formulated reservations, excluding the jurisdiction of the ICJ with respect to all international treaties that provided for such dispute settlement mechanisms. Further to the fall of communism, Romania rejoined the group of states that upholds and promotes the rule of law in international relations, which is what the court actually stands for. Consequently, after its return to democracy, Romania withdrew the reservations excluding the jurisdiction of the ICJ to the conventions concerned and favored the insertion of compromissory clauses in the bilateral and multilateral treaties it concluded. In 2004, Romania decided to seize the court with an important matter, namely the maritime delimitation of the Black Sea between Romania and Ukraine, based on a compromissory clause included in a bilateral treaty. Romania's experience in relation to these proceedings before the court has been fully positive and constituted a significant impetus for the decision to initiate the process leading in 2015 to the acceptance of the mandatory jurisdiction of the ICJ. It was with great honor for me to have signed the declaration recognizing as compulsory the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice on behalf of Romania during my first mandate as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania. The actors involved in the internal consultations have been very supportive to this step, which has been seen as being in harmony with the core guiding lines of Romania's foreign policy. This was a proof that international law was one of the most important pillars of the Romanian policy, and that it needed efficient instruments to be enforced, the International Court of Justice being the paramount tool. Distinguished participants, it is in this spirit that we have decided to organize today's event as a springboard to launch an outreach campaign aimed at promoting both the acceptance by more states of the compulsory jurisdiction of the court and the inclusion of compromissory clauses in treaties. We wish to build on previous efforts in this area and re-energize them in a more systemic manner. For this to happen, we considered useful to take the initiative of establishing a core group of supportive states willing to work together in building the follow-up process and decide on the most appropriate means of promoting the ICJ's jurisdiction. I'm extremely thankful to Mrs. Ines Soreide, the Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Norway, for taking the time to send us her recorded intervention, to Japan, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Norway, Spain, New Zealand, and Mexico for their decision to already join the core group, as well as to other states such as the Netherlands, Poland, Costa Rica, and Botswana for their expressions of support and willingness to cooperate in this exercise. We will hear from several government representatives and other participants in the discussion the views of their countries known for their activism in support of the court's work. After today, we will continue our demarches to rally like-minded states around this project. The contribution of the academic community is also tremendously important, both in today's event and in our future endeavors. We are privileged and grateful to have with us distinguished speakers to address this topic and help us better frame the future steps in promoting the jurisdiction of the ICJ. I anticipate at this point our intention to elaborate a declaration promoting the jurisdiction of the World's Court, which, after being negotiated and convened upon by the core group states, will be open for endorsement to all states willing to turn the International Court of Justice into a judicial body having de facto universal jurisdiction. Not last, we will also hear a recorded message of the UN Under-Secretary General for Legal Affairs, Miguel de Serpa Soares, who will provide us with useful input from the perspective of the Secretary General's depository function under multilateral treaties, as well as depository of declarations recognizing the jurisdiction of the court as compulsory. So I look forward to the discussions today.